out on the stream just catching 100, 150 fish a day. They had to be the most effective anglers the world has probably ever seen, or trout anglers. But they had to do it all with the simplest possible equipment that they could, just a rod, line, and fly. Instead of relying on a bunch of little gadgets like floating indicator, split shot, they had a rod, line, and fly, and they tried to catch fish with it. I discovered Tenkara about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, and I'm the first person to introduce the method outside of Japan. And a lot of people like it because it is simple. It kind of combines that simplicity of the cane pole fishing with fly fishing. It's just, you still have the casting, you have the fly, but it's just really simple. So the first thing that I'm going to do when I'm about to start fishing, I'm going to tie the line to the tip of the rod. And a lot of people, when you hear about, tying the line to the tip of the rod, they think, oh, yeah, it's just like the cane pole fishing, just dapping. And it is very much like the cane pole fishing. But the reason I asked for some time in the casting pond is that you do have to cast. It's a type of stream fishing where you do catch a fly forward, much like you would with a Western fly rod. So I got my whole setup here. It takes me about 30 seconds to set up, and I'm going to cast. And just hitting little pockets. So the first thing I'm going to have to ask you actually is to pretend like I'm not fishing a 60-foot lake, but instead that I'm fishing a smaller type of stream, the type of streams you find in the mountains here. So 25, 30 foot in front of me is the other side of the stream. Between me and the other side there's lots of little currents and pockets and little plunges and that type of thing. So if you were to imagine this being all kinds of white water and really confusing currents, one of the biggest advantages of Tenkara is that I'm getting on the other side of that with no line touching the water. And that translates into really, really good drifts, essentially. So if you imagine, again, all kinds of little currents in front of me, and you're using a short rod. Right now I have an 11-foot rod. If you're using a 9-foot rod even, and you're using a Western fly line, which is kind of heavy, you're going to cast, you're going to lay the line on the water, and you can see where it touches the water here. The first thing that's going to happen is the current is going to pick that up and drag it. So you have to do what is called manding. You have to throw the line upstream to fix that drag. A little bit different from Tenkara. Tenkara, you have this very long rod, very light line, and you're casting. And if there was any current at all here, that would be enough to pull my fly out and keep the line stretched so that it doesn't touch the water for about 20 feet. So that way you get, if you find a little pocket on the other side, you get the beautiful drift with absolutely no drag on your line. Now, one of my favorite things about Tenkara is that I don't have a whole lot of line to be managing and trying to control and kind of getting wrapped around my leg all the time. It's a very simple method of fishing. I'll cast into that pocket. If the fish are going to rise a little bit farther, I'm going to walk a little bit more. And I'm going to keep walking upstream or downstream, just hitting the little pockets without having to worry about what's happening to my line, without stripping an extra 2 to 3 feet of line every time. Very relaxing, very simple type of fishing. Now, one very, very interesting thing about Tenkara is that we have at our disposal a lot of different techniques that we can use. It's a very simple method of fishing, just rod, line, and fly. But when you start learning about the nuances of Tenkara and the techniques, you realize that there's a lot more to it. So we are all familiar with the idea of getting a drag-free drift or a dead drift with our fly. That's one of the main things that we can do with a Western fly rod setup. Now in Tenkara, there's this concept of using one fly pattern anywhere you go. For the last 2.5 years, I've used one pattern, and I travel all over the place, and I probably catch as many fish as I ever did. And the reason for that is that instead of only relying on one presentation, which is the dead drift, I have at my disposal a lot of different techniques. If the dead drift is not working with my one fly, I might cast and pulsate my fly up and down. And if you come by our booth right there at the end, you can get one of our little booklets, and you see those pictures of the flies that have this hackle facing forward. Very interesting. In the reverse hackle, when you start twitching your fly up and down, the fly opens and closes. And that's a very attractive thing to a lot of fish. One of my favorite presentations is just twitching the fly up and down, and the fly is closing and opening and just moving very, very lively, kind of like a lot of bugs underwater. If that technique is not working, one of my favorite techniques in like spring creeks or slower moving water is pausing my fly. Let's say the water's drifting this way. I'm going to cast, pause my fly, drift it, pause it and drift it, pause it and drift it, and kind of follow it down the stream. If you ever watch footage of bugs underwater, they're doing all kinds of things. So there might be bugs that are trying to swim to the surface and they're getting carried down. Swim up and get carried down until they break the surface of the water and they're able to hatch. So that might be one of the things that I'm imitating by pausing the fly, letting it drift. And the fish is kind of seeing the thing, pausing, coming closer, pausing, coming closer. A lot of little techniques. And if that's not working, or if the water's running kind of high, or if there's some big hungry browns in the water, a very effective technique is just pulling the fly like a streamer, like this. And I'm keeping more of my line in the water in this case because I want to make sure that everything stays anchored. If I start pulling it up, the fly's going to jump out. But I'll pull it like this, and great many hungry browns have been caught by doing that streamer type of action. So that's how you're able to use one fly pattern pretty much anywhere you go. Now, Tenkara is a fixed line method of fishing. You have a fixed length of line at the end of your rod. It does not mean short line fishing. You can use a long line as well, and I can probably do that in a couple minutes. But typically, a fixed line method of fishing translates into you just having to use your feet a little bit more. It's kind of like taking a picture with your camera phone. If you want to get closer to a subject, you give it a couple steps forward and you get closer to it. So it's one of those things. First, if I want to fish close to me, I can angle my rod tip high and fish right on my feet if I want to. If I want to fish a little farther, I can angle the rod tip low. If I want to fish farther yet, I'm just going to walk and keep walking. Very cool type of fishing. Now, the main question that we always get is, how do you reel in a fish if you don't have a reel? And I really like to have little kids in the audience when I do this, when I get that question, because with a little kid, all I have to do is give him the rod and be like, okay, how would you land my hand if my hand was a fish? And a 7-year-old kid will do it instantly. He's going to just pull the rod and get close to the fish and bring the fish close to him. When I give a rod to an adult, we tend to, or an experienced fly angler, we tend to overthink things too much. And I've seen people being like, I give it to an experienced fly angler and he's going to be like, well, the rod is collapsible, so I'm going to try to do this and put it down here. Much simpler than that. As I mentioned, it's kind of similar to the cane pole fishing. If the fish is pulling you one way, you're just going to pull it the other way. The rod is going to be flexing. If you're using a line that is longer than the rod, you're going to grab the line and hand over hand line the fish to get it closer to you. But it's probably one of the most intuitive parts of Tenkara is landing the fish. Fish is pulling you one way, you're going to pull it the other way. Very intuitive. It's kind of like a non-issue that we tend to overthink a little bit too much. Now the casting, just to give you an overview of the casting, you might have noticed that I'm breaking my wrist, and if you're into the fly casting thing, you know that that's a no-no, or most people would tell you, don't break your wrist. But the Tenkara casting is a little bit different than a Western fly cast. First of all, I'm maintaining my arm close to my body, very, very relaxed, so I don't get tired, I don't get my arm to be sore. And I'm doing very little movement. If I'm casting 30 feet of line, which I can, or 10 feet of line, it's the same exact movement. I'm going to move my arm up and break my wrist. And I'm going to move my arm just a couple inches and break my wrist. And essentially what's happening here, I'm giving speed to my rod. That's what's shooting my line back. And when I break my wrist, it makes the rod flex and then unflex. So that's how the casting, that's how you cast with the Tenkara rod. Again, it's a very intuitive part of it. It's not something I have to tell you a whole lot about the mechanics of casting. It's very much like throwing a rock at a target. You look at a target, your brain does all the work for you. You don't have to overthink how you cast. You just look at a target and your brain will do it for you. Since we do have a pretty low ceiling here, I'm going to stay away from the long line today, I think, because the casting with the Tenkara rod, it's more like you might have noticed like a steeple cast. I stop at 12 o'clock and I shoot the line up, and it's going to be hitting this pillar here all the time, especially when I start giving it for you to try. But keep in mind, you can fish in a variety of type of waters. First, if you're fishing a very tight stream, a very small stream like we find here, I would use a shorter line than a rod. This line here is 13 feet long. It's a little bit better for like a wider type of stream. If I'm fishing a smaller stream, I'm going to use a shorter line. I'm using an 11-foot rod right here, but keep in mind I can hold the rod up high. All of a sudden it's a 10-foot rod. I can get down on my knees if I want to, and I can fish a very tight stream this way. I could even collapse one segment if I'm fishing a really tight spot all of a sudden, and now I have essentially probably an 8-foot rod, short line, and I can fish all kinds of water just doing that. And then when I get to the more open type of part of the stream, just extend the rod and just fish as I normally would. So there's a lot of versatility to it. And at this point, does anybody have any questions? I'll open up to casting here in a second so you can try it. Any questions I can answer? So the landing of the fish is pulling one way, you're just going to pull it the other way. Just a couple of tips. Do not extend your arm high, because that's going to be hard to reach the line at this point. And if there's one thing I can teach you for Western fly fishing too, don't extend your arm high when you're using a reel even. Keep your arm close to your body and just kind of play off the rod. And that allows you to, if the fish runs towards you, you can always extend it to kind of get the slack off. But just angle the rod back like this. And come by our booth and get one of our booklets as well. You can learn a lot more about Tenkara. And at 2 o'clock this afternoon, I'm giving a presentation up in Destination Theaters upstairs. If you want to learn more about the history and see some videos of what Tenkara looks like. Sorry? The most versatile length rod. Yeah, so the rods range from 11 feet all the way to 14 feet 7 inches. I always tell people, get the longest rod you can, because that will give you a lot more versatility. You can fish at a full length, you can hold it up here and it's a little bit shorter. You can use a shorter line as well. But get the longest rod you can for the streams that you're fishing. If you're fishing very tight streams, 11 feet rods. If you're fishing like some bigger streams, 13-foot rods for sure. 12-foot is kind of the average length of rod. And they all collapse into 20 to 25 inches. Most of the rods are 20 inches when they're collapsed. One of the rods is 25 inches when it's collapsed in length, which makes it very, very nice for carrying between bushes. You kind of wrap.
So in reference to fishing tight areas, that's the point. So you take 14.7 rod, so you really can't collapse it much further.
Yeah, there is a point. Exactly. So if you're fishing very tight areas, it's very handy to have a short rod. As long as you have overhead opening, it's okay. You can fish pretty much anywhere. But if you're fishing a lot of very small streams, you do want to use a shorter rod as much as possible. Or just use a very short line. It kind of depends on the stream. 11 foot is a very good length for a Tenkara rod for the smaller type of streams for sure. Okay, to fish, we always suggest collapsing at the most one segment. But what happens, a lot of people think they're going to be collapsing the rod a lot of times, and it really doesn't happen as much as they think they would. Here you have a full length of rod, and you have a fixed length of line. So you know exactly where you can cast to avoid the bushes. You're not going, on the back cast, you're not going far behind you, so you're not getting into trees behind you. And you have a lot of awareness kind of where you can cast. So a lot of people think, oh yeah, I'm going to be collapsing it all the time. It really doesn't happen a whole lot. Once you get used to the idea, it just doesn't, you kind of want the full length as much as possible. Any more questions I can answer? Yeah. What happens when you get snagged? So there's going to be a few different things. Typically, you don't get snagged right overhead at the most reach of your rod. You're going to get snagged at a certain distance. Walk as close to the snag as you can, collapse the rod, and pull the line. That's the best way. And just put a finger here so the rod doesn't come out and break, and pull on the line. Or if it's really deep snag, same thing, try to get close and pull it. On occasion, in about 4 years of Tenkara fishing, I've had my line getting stuck 3 different times that I couldn't reach the line. And 2 of those times were in trade shows where we had very low pillars and I'm casting right overhead. But out on the stream, like if it does ever happen, just pull the rod straight out. And it's not advisable, but you'll be okay. You can get free from pretty much any snag. And the tip at the end is 5X, so it's not too difficult to break. Does anybody want to try casting it? Yeah, 5X, the reason we suggest 5X, first the rods are very flexible and they'll protect 5X tippet very well, but you want that to be the weak link, in the whole system. So if you get snagged deep or far away, you can break off the 5X without cutting your hand essentially, or fairly easily with the rod. So 5X is definitely what we recommend for the rods. Perfect. And the cast, it's better to use an index finger on the top of the rod and hold it as close to the end as you can. You can hold it anywhere, but that's where it's going to be easiest to cast. And you're just going to go up and down. Good. A little bit farther back. Excellent. That's it. And you can do much less force too if you want. It's a very, very easy cast. Good. That's pretty much it. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.